Hello, I'm Müge Satar from Newcastle University.
And I'm Mirjam Hauck from the Open University. We are both from the United Kingdom. And our presentation is on differential learner experiences in virtual exchange, digital equity revisited. Here is the outline for our presentation. We will start with the theoretical backdrop to our contribution, including our previous work and how it has led to the focus in this presentation. What we do, our data analysis remains grounded in social semiotics, but we have a new set of data from new exchanges. Now this will allow us to zoom in on 3 virtual exchange participants and their virtual exchange experiences. We will conclude with some recommendations in terms of how we can promote digital equity in virtual exchange. Okay, the theoretical backdrop. Virtual exchange offers international and intercultural online experiences for all students in higher education, and this is how it has been defined: a practice supported by research that consists of sustained technology-enabled people-to-people education programs or activities in which constructive communication and interaction takes place between individuals or groups who are geographically separated and or from different cultural backgrounds. And all of this happens with the support of educators or specifically trained facilitators. The virtual exchange combines the deep impact of intercultural dialogue and exchange with the broad reach of digital technology. Now, the environments that are mostly used in virtual exchanges are not ideologically neutral. The technologies are used in situated and encultured ways. We know that from research. They steer learners to normative behaviors and meanings. They shape how learners position each other and how they perform identities online, and how information is legitimated and distributed. And the material dimensions of online spaces can be indicative of dominant ideologies, economies, and institutions. So how about digital equity in virtual exchange? So although virtual exchange offers equal opportunities for internationalization, online communication spaces, which usually form the backdrop for VE, are not inherently equitable. And the learners' varying levels of digital literacies, multimodal communicative competence, and semiotic skills tend to determine individual learner experiences. Bessemer and Kress 2016 point out that learners need to understand the semiotic potential of a much wider range of resources when they operate in digital spaces. So, although virtual exchange does open opportunities for the non-physically mobile students, we need to question whether online spaces are inherently equal or whether they perpetuate inequalities that we know from face-to-face contexts, or whether they maybe even create a different kind of inequalities, digital inequalities. In earlier work, Satar and Hauck used social network analysis and have shown that not all learners were active members of an online community. While some could actively engage in interaction on an online discussion board and became key players with frequent interactions with many members of the community, others remained outliers. And Müge and I have also observed differential skills in multimodal competence and meaning making. In our 2018 study, when virtual exchange participants were asked to design posters to represent their patterns of participation based on Simon's metaphors of animals, these were some of the results. So while one student, if you look to the left, was able to successfully represent fluent, transient, and evolving patterns of participation using multiple modes, text, images, video, a song even, and arrows to guide through the person who looked at the poster, to guide that person through the meaning-making sequence, and was able to develop a coherent narrative in their poster. Another learner's poster was chaotic, and the multimodal composition left the reader guessing what the intended meaning actually was. And in yet another study, we investigated how groups of virtual exchange participants collaborated to create a digital group identity using Prezi. We looked at both the process of collaboration and the digital outputs, the products of the collaboration. We specifically looked at two groups which used the same Prezi template but had very different outcomes. The group who created the presentation on the left capitalized on the affordances of the presentation software, such as motion, zooming in, zooming out, spatial relationships, and their design choices during the collaboration showed evidence of their awareness of motivated sign making. What do we mean by motivated sign making? That is the ability to understand, interpret, and execute the relationship and interaction between different formats of digital media and their modal affordances. So the learner's multimodal literacy. And another dimension of motivated sign making, the informed use of a range of interacting representational resources in context. So the learner's autonomy. In the other group, the figure on the right, the spatial relationships between each section of the presentation was not made evident. The layout did not seem to follow a pattern. There was no background image, and the image chosen was the group logo, as the group logo, a bridge, was not made prominent at all. So compared to the presentation on to the left, the motion affordance of Prezi was used less effectively, and information about the group members who did not actively contribute to the presentation and dropped out in the course of the VE had been excluded by the other group members. And this brings us back to the point of how technology shapes how learners position each other, how they perform identities, and how information is legitimated and distributed, or in this case, left out. Finally, last year at our Eurocall presentation, Müge and I showed how different virtual exchange participants presented themselves in Padlet introductions with various levels of symbolic power. The posts were multimodally similar, that is, they were all composed of text and images. So in the typical post, learners presented themselves as relatable and likable people. But in the what we call power posts, they situated themselves in relation to an important or famous figure within the field of study. And they made a kind of statement about who they are and who they know. That was what mattered to them. And in the same presentation, we drew on Bourdieu's concept of symbolic power, Claire Gramsci's idea of symbolic competence, and on Ron Darwin's perspective on critical digital literacy and the operation of power within digital contexts. We argued that those who can represent their meanings and identities effectively online by capitalizing on the affordances of the available media will have more symbolic power, and that those who cannot are at risk of being marginalized. And we propose that VE can be conceptualized as a sandpit for learners to explore their skills for meaning making and identity representation outside of filter bubbles, that they can become aware of power structures implicated in digital social practices. They can overcome digital inequalities created by varying levels of symbolic power. And they can experience and experiment with being inclusive by supporting others in having a presence and a voice online. Here now, our guiding research question is there a digital and semiotic gap among virtual exchange participants that puts equitable learner experiences at risk? Over to you, Müge.
Thanks, Mirjam. So in the next part of this presentation, we will talk you through our methods and some of the newer data that we have based on the same virtual exchange program that we talked about last year at Eurocall and how it developed this year. So next slide, please, Mirjam. So our starting point in these virtual exchange project with between Newcastle University and TED University in Turkey are two iterative virtual exchanges, and with a total of 86 teacher trainees between a British and a Turkish institution, organized as part of their teacher training and teacher education programs between 2018 and 2020. So before setting up the exchange, as both lecturers in two institutions, we participated in a virtual exchange training offered by the EU-funded Evolve project, and Mirjam was actually our mentor in that project. The exchange was designed first by identifying the module and course objectives at each partner institution, followed by an identification of tasks that could enable these objectives to be achieved, and the most suitable technologies that were then identified to facilitate task completion. As you see in this table on the screen, both programs were very similar in terms of the participant age groups, their backgrounds, and the course objectives. So while there was a 6-week overlap in the first year in 2019, allowing for 2 weeks of interactions for the completion of each task, this year in 2020, we only had a 3-week overlap, which meant that each task had to be completed in 1 week in the second iteration. Participants in both iterations engaged in multimodal synchronous exchanges via Zoom and Google Slides, and asynchronous online exchanges on Padlet structured around 3 tasks: self-introductions, group identity formation, and the evaluation of the exchange for digital literacy development. Over the course of the exchanges, participants recorded their reflections on e-portfolios, which provided prompts to stimulate reflection on intercultural communication, critical digital literacy, and social presence. So the data that was generated was a rich corpus of learner interactions and reflections. And on the screen, you see the large amount of data that we collected over the 2 years. So to analyze this data was a big challenge. And as we did in all the other studies that Mirjam summarized, we started from the learner reflections in e-portfolios as evidence of their lived experience and perceived outcomes. Excuse me. I've just lost track of my notes. There you go. And their perceived outcomes following an interpretivist methodological perspective. So by doing so, we identified 3 cases and who represent differential skills and differential learner outcomes. We then explored all the digital artifacts and online interactions generated by these 3 cases in terms of the breadth and depth of their international experiences using social semiotic analysis. Social semiotics explores, and I quote from Bezemer and Jevitt, 2009, page 1. Social semiotics explores the media of dissemination and the modes of communication that people use and develop to represent their understanding of the world and to shape power relations with others. So social semiotics assumes that all signs, that is, all meanings, are motivated, and modes have different meaning potentials. Modes are chosen by the speakers or the writers in relation to their aptness to represent certain meanings within the sociocultural context. Social semiotic analysis examines the affordances of the chosen modes, how meanings are made within certain design choices, and how sign makers engage in transformative processes of transformation, transduction, and mimesis as they make and remake meanings in different forms and using different modes. So here are our preliminary findings from 3 cases: Sophia, Serena, and Choki. Our first case is Sophia, who represents the experience of learners who already bring a number of skills and competencies that position themselves at a strong place in the virtual exchange to start with. So on this slide, you'll see Sophia's reflections after the first individual task of introducing herself on Padlet. She reflects on her ability to interpret introductory posts of other virtual exchange participants as unique individuals, rather than relating others' identities to their national cultural divisions. She also demonstrates her sensitivity to acceptable and unacceptable topics for discussion within the sociocultural context of the Turkish partners. We also observe her engagement with a deeper level of reflection in which she demonstrates regret in not pursuing to follow an opportunity to learn more about gender equality in Turkey, a topic brought up by one of the Turkish participants, which you see on the slide on the right. Thus, too much sensitivity or care towards not offending others appears to preclude Sophia from engaging with deeper critical conversations at this stage after task 1. So in this second slide, you see Sophia's explanation of her own introductory post, which does show that her modal choices were indeed motivated. She intentionally chose a picture of herself in Istanbul, which is in the country of her exchange partners, while she's smiling and holding a bagel to relay her real experience of the Turkish culture. The video she posted is a short video of Granger Market in Newcastle and included both a local Turkish corner shop and an Italian pizzeria. This is indeed a testimony to her intercultural, to her awareness of creating intercultural affinity and high social presence, representing herself successfully as an Italian student studying at Newcastle with a real lived experience of the Turkish culture. Mirjam, shall we watch this video at this point?
Yeah, here we go.
The market now. It's one of my favorite places in Newcastle. It's a quite big market, it's in the city center, and I like it because they sell fresh fruits and vegetables and they're quite cheap. I know it doesn't look so exciting from this video probably, but I really like it because I think it's an authentic place. And oh, a Turkish street food restaurant. I've never been there. Oh, now I'm going to have some good pizza. Here they make very good pizza. Bye. The market now.
Can we go back again, Mirjam, but without the video? Yeah, thank you. So she also, in her reflections, writes about her awareness of the power of video as a tool to depict reality more vividly, but also she talks about the limited affordances of Padlet. Because she posted already a picture of herself, she was not able to embed the video in her post, but she was able to add a URL in between the text. So she's aware that not many people may have noticed the video of the Granger Market, as it is only a URL within the text as opposed to a video standing on its own. So her post received 13 likes and 7 comments, which was one of the highest number of reactions in this cohort. And through her intercultural communication and multimodal and semiotic skills, Sophia managed to achieve a high level of social presence and initial in-depth intercultural connections with her VE participants. So in her reflections following task 2, Sophia demonstrated her ability to form distinct personalities of her exchange partners by understanding their feelings and expectations. Thus, Sophia is not only able to create signs to represent herself socially and emotionally, but also interpret others' feelings and thus the social presence of her partners. She again shows sensitivity to sociocultural appropriateness, this time by paying attention to the meanings signified in images that they use. This is represented through a discussion with another student at Newcastle around how to use an image with a wine glass, which you see on the right on the slide, and how this will be perceived by their exchange partners. This time, however, rather than avoiding the topic, they chose to use the image and include it in their PowerPoint slides and observe their partners' reactions, and which was the case as we see in Sophia's reflections after task 2. And she says that they did not seem upset and they did not ask to remove the image, so hopefully that it was fine. Next, again in her reflections after task 2, Sophia demonstrates an understanding towards the impact of different levels of participation in interaction during their Zoom calls and how this impacted on interactional power. So Sophia avoided dominating the talk and the design of the Google Slides. This indicated a good level of interactional competence, especially by avoiding interactional power through holding the floor too long or participating in the task too much, and by inviting their virtual exchange partners to contribute to the design of the slides. Thus, Sophia managed to maintain an equal interactional space and give others a voice. This short clip demonstrates how Sophia does this in interaction.
Shall we choose some, where can I choose like the layout for the slide?
We're not experts about Google Slides, so if you know, like you can also modify the page or edit it as you like.
Okay. Do you know like how to choose some nice layout?
Okay. I will just try something.
Oh,
yes, okay. So let's just wait that she...
Yeah.
It stopped, Müge.
Stopped, yeah, thank you. We can move on to the next slides.
Good.
So Sophia's reflections after task 3 show evidence that she was now able to achieve interpersonal relations and establish social presence with her international partners, as she states that this time they already knew each other. An important indicator of this for Sophia is that they engaged in off-task talk beyond what they were required to discuss by the task by their lecturers, which is a sign of genuine interest in continuing interaction. Sophia and Laila both participated in the Zoom interactions from the same room, and this time they intentionally chose a well-lit venue to be able to relay their facial expressions more clearly. In her reflections for this task, Sophia again demonstrated her awareness of the impact of limited bandwidth capacity on the quality of Zoom interactions. She reported an instance when she did not feel comfortable talking about the parents' actions on social media, which can sometimes be embarrassing for the children. This short clip shows how Sophia carefully framed her argument and her slight discomfort around second 58 as she takes a deep breath, and when we can observe her discomfort with the situation. The conversation then continues with frequent reciprocal smiles, which were for Sophia, as she reports in her portfolio, confirmation that she had not offended anyone with her arguments.
and I think we are young, so we're able to do so, but like older people, maybe they didn't have all those tools in the past, so they're not so skilled. For example, when I think about my mom, or in general, older people, like, of course, I don't want to generalize because some are very skilled with technology, much better than me, but others are not used to that. So they struggle when it comes to filtering images, and also sometimes they tend to be a bit inappropriate, like for example on social media, like on social networks like Facebook. They don't know what's appropriate to share and what's not appropriate to share because they've never had social networks before. So for them it's all new, and they're not very up to date.
I agree with you, because for example, my mom, she's my friend on Facebook, and whenever like I appear in some video or in some pictures, she comments on it, and it doesn't matter if she knows the people, you know, or if she doesn't know the people, like my mom always comments, "Oh, I've seen you there. Oh, so cute, so nice." And she comments just on like anyone's, you know, my friends' pictures or videos. My friends don't know my mom, and it's kind of awkward, but she thinks it's okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Mirjam. However, not all students had positive experiences. So one area of interest for us was what happens when one of the modes is not available to certain students. So Serena was a case in point, as she preferred not to show her face in her Padlet introduction post by putting nice little hearts over her head, and not to use her camera in her Zoom calls. Although she was aware that lack of images and video impacted on the level of her presence and social and emotional involvement, as she reported in her portfolio, it was her choice not to avail of these modes as she had privacy concerns. In her introductory post, like Sophia, she did mention her visit to Turkey and chose an image to establish her presence as a student in Newcastle. As we continue to work on our analysis of this case, we would like to question the following. Does this introductory post have a similar level of symbolic power and demonstration of intercultural affinity as Sophia's introductory post? Or is there anything different? And when Serena chooses not to use her webcam in Zoom interactions, what other semiotic resources can she use to establish as strong a presence as others who use a webcam? Another interesting excerpt from Serena's self-reflection is the way she was able to interpret semiotic meanings that can be implied in the image of a rainbow. This group chose the name of the name to describe their identity as Rainbow Girls, and in their Google Slides they wanted to choose an image of a rainbow to represent that name. So we see here in her reflections that she avoided any risk or harm that may be caused within her own sociocultural context by any implications of what a rainbow may represent. As we see on the right, this is a transcription of their interaction. We are not able to show you the video content for this interaction because the participant didn't want us to use her audio or video for research, but she was okay with that transcription. So we see that as in online spaces, participants are not completely free, and some participants are not without concerns for what can be shared and discussed in online environments. So creating safe zones for critical discussion is indeed a challenge for people like us who want to facilitate virtual exchange. And this is especially the case when the socio-cultural background of the virtual exchange participants are varied, like in our case. And a final case before we end, we would like to briefly touch on an illustration of what happens when all virtual exchange partners are not as sensitive to equal participation and contribution like Sophia did in the first case. So this is from Choki, a male student from Newcastle, who had 2 different experiences in his Zoom calls for task 2 and task 3. So for task 2, he was enthusiastic and reported that everyone was involved in the conversation and felt that he was finally getting to know others. However, in a self-reflection following task 3, he reported his lack of contribution to the task and amount of interactional floor he was able to hold. He said that he was not happy with not being able to gain speakership and proposed certain structures to be put in place to enable equal participation and interactional space. This makes us reflect back on task design and the need to consider interactional structures that not all virtual exchange participants would inherently cater for, like Sophia showed us, and how equal contribution could be facilitated by the other partners.
Now, some conclusions. We have a quote here, a very touching quote from one of the Turkish participants, Gonca.
Sorry, what Gonca says represents the large majority of the group of our virtual exchange participants, and who reported extremely positive experiences and suggested that the project encouraged respectful engagement between individuals. So as lecturers at the 2 ends of the spectrum in Newcastle and in Istanbul, this does make us very happy by having such a positive experience in the end.
Yeah, I was also very impressed when I saw this focus on respectful engagement. Now, what's the takeaway from all of this? I think we can say the following with some certainties in terms of what we need to do to ensure digital equity in virtual exchange. Well, obviously there needs to be equal access to technologies and to the internet, or there needs to be an appropriate choice of accessible tools and affordances. We need activities that facilitate the development of various learner skills through guided observation and reflection. We've seen the importance of the reflections in the data we have presented to you. We need activities also that raise awareness for the meaning-making potential of tools and applications that are used in virtual exchange. And we need to raise awareness of how virtual exchange environments steer learners to normative behaviors and meanings, and awareness of how they shape the way in which learners position each other, how they position themselves, and how they perform identities. Müge, over to you.
Okay, to conclude then, ensuring digital equity in virtual exchange is not an easy task. As Mirjam said, it does begin by allowing equal access to technologies and the internet, of course, so that all participants can actually have access. But it is not achieved without equal opportunities to establish, a variety of digital skills and competencies, which we currently hypothesize to have 6 components, but we're pretty sure this is not an exhaustive list, but kind of the elements we have observed in our studies over the last few years. So we would say that intercultural equity is important, brought on by intercultural communicative competence and related skills to establish intercultural affinity, but also interactive and participatory equity in terms of how digital interactional competencies play a role for equal participation in equal contribution. Also relational and interpersonal equity by knowing how to present yourself emotionally and socially, but also being able to understand others' presences and being able to give them a voice and make sure that everyone in the exchange is able to participate equally. Semiotic equity, as we touched on today, the multimodal communicative competence and the digital meaning-making skills, and the way that the participants can interpret the variety of signs and meanings that can be interpreted from an image based on various sociocultural contexts. critical equity, obviously critical digital literacy, which is an area for Mirjam and her expertise, that we have seen how students sometimes avoid certain topics, that they should actually be able to address these topics and talk about these in a respectful manner rather than avoiding them. But also pedagogical equity. In some of our work, we've shown how autonomy and self-regulation plays an important role in what the students might be able to take away from these exchanges.
And with this, we say thank you and look forward to talking to you about our work.
Yeah, we are very much looking forward to discussing what you think of this data or of your own data as we develop our ideas further. And our discussion is on the 20th of October on a Tuesday. So we look forward to seeing you then.
Bye.
Bye.